Hello, fellow Americans. This is Cathi Chamberlain, otherwise known as the deplorable author of the book Rules for Deplorables, a primer for fighting radical socialism. You're about to view a video of a presentation I recently made to a group of patriots just like you. If you like what you see, drop on by my website where you can order the book. It comes in ebook, audiobook, and also the paperback. That would be www.rulesfordeplorablesbook.com. Thank you so much for your support, and may God bless America.
Cathi Chamberlain is the deplorable author, is a four-time startup business owner, published author of a self-help book featured on CNN Worldwide, owner of the nation's first all-female construction company, and Florida state building contractor. In her new book, Rules for Deplorables, a primer for fighting radical socialism, Cathi heavily references Saul Alinsky's 72 blockbuster book, Rules for Radicals, and that's what the Democrats are now, explaining how his tactics advanced the leftist strategy by sociologist Richard Cloward and Francis Fox Piven. Radicals have been using these methods for decades to change our values and culture in order to fundamentally transform America into a socialistic state. Conservatives cannot fight back unless we understand the important message in Cathi's book. This may be one of the single most important books of the 2020 election. You can hear Cathi every Tuesday morning on AM 860, 970, also, right, Cathi, 970?
Yes.
And 860.
Oh, I'm sorry, no, not 970, 860. And now it's no longer every week, every Tuesday because of the political candidates coming up, so it'll be every other Tuesday. So call them and demand me.
This is the Salem Radio Network, where she's a regular contributor on Captain Matt Bruce's America Third Watch, nationally syndicated radio show. It's been my great pride and pleasure that I introduce Cathi Chamberlain, our speaker today.
Thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate the warm welcome. Somebody asked what time on the radio. I'm not used to this, and I don't know if you're going to get up for me or not, but it's at 5:30 in the morning. So I'm up at 4 on those mornings. I'm a busy lady lately, I'll tell you, and I'm very, very thankful for that, and I feel extremely blessed that God has called me to spread this message, and that's how I feel, because as of 2 years ago, if you knew me, and I told you I was going to be up in front of a bunch of conservatives talking about rules for deplorables, I would have laughed in your face, because I was doing the so opposite. I was actually brought up, a lot of you have heard my story, but for those of you who haven't, I'm going to go over it very briefly because it is important to the overall message. I was brought up in a very conservative household. My dad was a military officer, and I was the middle child. What does that tell you? I rebelled, and I moved from DC as soon as I could get out of the house all the way to the left coast. And I lived in Los Angeles for about the next 15 years, and that entire time I was a left-wing liberal, let me tell you. That's why I know what they think. And there was only one thing that started me kind of coming back around to the right a little sort of bit, and that one thing occurred in 1992. Can anybody guess what that might have been? Someone's going to get it. He's no longer alive, unfortunately, but I just loved this man. Remember Ross Perot? I just loved him. So I actually became a volunteer on his campaign committee and got very, very active, yeah. And so I just started opening up my mind and saying things a little bit differently, moved to Texas, and of course that opened it up a little bit better, but I became an independent after Ross Perot. And I remained an independent until I moved here in '95. I've been here in St. Petersburg for 25 years. But I was an independent all those years. And I probably would still be an independent, except something else happened in 2016. Can anybody guess what that is? Thank you, Mr. President. I love Donald J. Trump. He works day and night for us, and for what the left is putting him through, they should be ashamed. At any rate, so then I was happily moving along, just very happy in my life. I had my own construction company. I did it all. I did drywall, I did flooring, I did tile, I did everything. And I absolutely loved it. And I was making some pretty good money too. And right after Irma hit, I was about 10 feet up on my ladder inspecting a roof out in the Orlando area. And my ladder just went right that way. And I went back on a concrete slab from 10 feet up. And I ended up getting airlifted to Osceola Trauma Center. I broke my back in 2 places. I broke both of my wrists. I broke my collarbone. And I still have some lasting effects from it. It's not noticeable, but I do. But it's okay, because you know what? God said if he didn't do something right then, I wasn't going to be doing this. And I recognize that, and I feel so blessed. I really, really do, because this message is so important to get out. And how I even got into this, I laid in the hospital for 3 months. My 2 sisters watched over me, you know, day in, day out, shifts. And I was watching Fox News constantly, and they just can't stand Fox News. So it was the first time I had a captive audience with them. And every time I'd doze off, I'd hear CNN come on, and I'd wake up and I'd say, no, you don't. So it took me about 1.5 years through therapy to get back on my feet and to get to a place. The doctor said, no more construction. My entire life changed in an instant. So I was thinking, as I was laying there, about a book that I read back when I was a libtard. Sorry, I couldn't resist. And at that time, of course, I thought it was the greatest book around. Now I know different. But I read Rules for Radicals. How many people are familiar with Saul Alinsky and his Rules for... How many people have actually read it? That's a whole different question, isn't it? It's not an easy read to get through. It's so silly. It's so academic. It's dumb, actually. But I remembered this book, and I knew what kind of an effect it had on the left and our country. And I decided I needed to read it again, this time with a more conservative critique. So I picked it up, and I started reading, and I thought, you know what? I have never, ever seen somebody take this book and its 13 tactics and break them down in such an easy to understand way, using current events to illustrate how they're being used against us. I've never seen it really done before. People have written about him. People have written about, you know, his ideology and that sort of thing. We know he's the father of community organizing. We know former President Obama studied under him. That's how he got involved with ACORN, the fraudulent voter volunteer. Well, he was actually employed by them. I don't know how many of you realize that. We know Hillary wrote her thesis while she was in Wesleyan College, and it's still under lock and key. But many of us don't really know how it's being used against us. And even more than that, and let me ask you this question. How many of you have heard of a couple called Richard Cloward and Frances Fox Piven? Not as many, though. Some of you have. This is critical, and this is something, this was a couple who were in Columbia University, and back in the 60s, they wrote their first strategy paper. They wrote a series of strategy papers on how to overcome our systems and turn our country into a socialist country. They literally wrote the blueprint for our country to become socialist, and we don't even know them. The very first paper they wrote in 1966 was called The Weight of the Poor, and it was a strategy paper for ending poverty. And you know what their main goal in that was? to guarantee, to overwhelm our welfare systems, get everybody on the welfare systems so that they could guarantee everybody a guaranteed annual income. How familiar does that sound? Now, interestingly enough, the strategy papers, Coward Piven, that's what they're known as, they partnered with Alinsky, and people don't realize this. So they wrote the blueprint. Alinsky's 13 tactics actually take that blueprint to its finished product and give them a vehicle by which to get there. That's why it's critical to know both. I talk about both of them, Coward Piven especially, in chapter 1, so that people can really understand how that all ties in, because it makes a big difference. So I want to ask you all a question, and by the way, now I've got, and a lot of you know this, but I'm on tour now. This is just taking off. I could not be more thrilled. I'm trying to get the book into school systems. I was out in Vero Beach last night. I was very excited to be there, Indian River REC, and awesome people. And they, a great crowd too. It was just incredible. But with this Florida Deplorable book tour, is what I'm calling it, and it's taking me all over Florida. It's a hardship for me. So if you like what I'm going to teach you today about Alinsky's tactics, and you'd like to help me get that message out, last night I met 2 different people that work for charter school systems. I'm so thrilled about that, because my ultimate goal for writing this book is to try to get it into our school systems and prevent our kids from this continuing indoctrination. Because if we lose one more generation, we're already almost too late, folks. And we've got to get on high speed with this. Now, my book, Rules for Deplorables, a primer for fighting radical socialism, I take every one of Alinsky's 13 tactics and give it a chapter. And each chapter breaks down a tactic. I have over 400 footnotes in my book. I did extreme research for this book because I did not want the left, when this does end up on Fox News, I do not want the left coming after me with one little mistake. I have not had one person. I have a 500, it enjoys a 100% 5-star rating on Amazon. So I'm really proud of that. Yes. You how many of you folks in here have said, and don't be shy about this because it helps me kind of get a better idea kind of who I'm talking to. How many of you have said in the past, geez, I wish Trump wouldn't tweet so much? Quite a few. And how many of those or how many others have said, it's just not presidential? Right? I hope by the end of what I have to tell you today, you will never say that again. Because if it was not for Trump's tweets, we wouldn't know half of what we know today. And my chapter number 8, by the way, is called Trick or Tweet. And the 8th tactic, Alinsky's tactic that goes with that chapter, is keep the pressure on. Yes. And guess what? The left are masters at that. And we are so bad at it. And if we put pressure on, if conservatives put pressure on, what happens? They use tactic number 5. And tactic number 5 is ridicule is man's most potent weapon. So if the conservatives put pressure on, what happens to them? They get called what? Racist. Homophobe. Xenophobe. This is all, by the way, intentional. They know we're not racist. They know Trump's not a racist. They know we're not homophobe. They know all that. But what does it do? It shuts us up. And we have got to stop shutting up. And the reason some people call President Trump unpresidential is because he doesn't shut up. And I love him for that. He's the first president. We've had presidents that shut up. We had 43. We had kinder, gentler. We've had more compassionate. Look at the shape we're in. Folks, there is no doubt in my mind we are one election away from being a socialist country. And the only people who are anti-Trumpers, never Trumpers, those people, I ask them along my travels, I say to them, okay, you don't like Trump. Okay, do you believe that we are capable of becoming a socialist country? And 100% of them say, no way. That's the difference between them and us. They really don't think it's possible. Well, let me tell you something. My chapter number 2 is Viva la Revolución. Okay, and I talk in there about AOC and Venezuela. And the tactic number 2 that goes with that chapter is never go outside the experience of your people. That's why they put dumb candidates like AOC up there, because she can relate. Seriously. They have dumbed down our youth so much. They gotta have dumb people in, and that's gonna be their curse in the end run, the Democrats. Because they've indoctrinated so many students, and what do? As soon as they get out of college, they join the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Okay, so that means the Democratic Party is imploding by the dummies that they've actually raised. But the best chapter that I think illustrates really how the Alinsky tactics are working against us is chapter number 4. Chapter number 4 is all about Kavanaugh. It just happened when I was writing this book that my chapter number 4, I was on at the time that Kavanaugh went through what he went through. And our tactic number 4 is make the enemy live up to their own book of rules. Now think about that. I call that chapter, by the way, White Men Can't Judge. And the truth is, he was such a perfect nomination. He has such a sterling reputation. He's who we all want our daughters to bring home, or for our sons to grow up like. And they love that because his book of rules is so high, nobody could meet what the left tried to shove on him. Make the enemy live up to their own book of rules. Why aren't we making pencil neck, shifty shift, live up to his own book of rules for a change? We don't do that enough. Are we calling our representatives? Are we pushing them? I'm going to read for you just a very few short statements. When Trump is fighting right now this impeachment, in the last 2 months, here's some of the quotes I've written down that have come from some of the congressmen and the representatives that we have. One, quote, "It would have been better if Trump hadn't mentioned Biden's name." They're talking about the letter here, the phone call, right? Another one said, "The conversation reported in the memorandum relating to alleged Ukrainian corruption about Biden was inappropriate." One said the transcript raised more questions. Another one says, "A highly incriminating transcript. And it seems POTUS doesn't know the difference between right and wrong." Another says, "I wish President Trump hadn't raised the issue with the Ukrainian president." And, this goes on and on. It's inappropriate for the president to be talking with foreign governments about investigating his political opponents. Guess who said these? Republicans. With people like this, who needs Democrats? Right? It's ridiculous. If they can't say anything 100% behind our president, they should say nothing. Remember when former presidential candidate John McCain was at a town hall meeting and a woman stood up and she asked him the question, is Obama an Arab sympathizer? Yeah. Do y'all remember that? Yeah. You know what his answer was? No. Emphatically. I'm thinking to myself, wait a second, how does he know? Very good point. And that's why the left does a lot against us. They do what they do. They accuse us of doing what they do. We all know that. And that is a very good point. So all of these statements came from Republicans. Ben Sass says, Republicans ought not to be rushing to circle the wagons. Excuse me? Why not? He says, when there's obviously loss, it's very troubling here. No, there's not. There's nothing troubling here. The Bidens, when Trump, I read the transcript. I don't know how many of you all did, but it's incumbent on every one of us to understand what is going on here. Because our president so far is facing this stuff alone, pretty much, as far as his own party goes. Our own Marco Rubio. You want to hear what he said? I don't think he should have raised the topic of Joe Biden with the Ukrainian president. I just don't think our U.S. foreign policy should be used as leverage against individuals in our domestic politics. Now let me tell you folks, if you've been following this impeachment thing pretty closely, and the Ukrainian thing, our president's not asking for the Ukrainian president to investigate Joe Biden because he happens to be running for president. Right. He's asking him to straighten out this whole mess about the 2016 elections. That's where he's going with this. In 2016 elections, the DNC went to Ukraine, got the corrupt Ukrainian governmental officials to basically find dirt on Trump and Manafort. Look at Manafort, where he's sitting today. If our Republican representatives don't stand up better than this, we're in deep trouble. And I hear a lot of people saying, oh, Trump's going to win by a landslide. Never, ever, ever get complacent. For reason number one, the biggest reason. If you saw that executive from Google in front of Congress, and he was a liberal, and he worked for Google, and he couldn't do it anymore because he saw what Google was doing with the algorithms and the analytics. And what he found out was that in just one day, they can swing our elections by 10 million votes. Wow. And nobody will know it. Wow. Yeah. Everybody needs to be involved, folks. Every single one of you. I carry voter registrations. I am so busy. I'm busier than I ever was working. And by the way, any help, I finally decided I cannot do this alone. I just can't. Sully, the videographer, asked me on my way over here, why don't you go back to the work you were doing? Folks, I could do that so easy. That was a 6-figure income for me. It really hurt more than physically when I fell off that ladder. And it's very hard for me to ask for money. I finally put a contribution button up on my website because I can't do it alone anymore. I've got a love basket up here. Thank you, Lori. That's her idea. But any help you can give me, especially if you know of any groups that are looking for speakers, it's so important to get this message out. And that is, last night, I drove in almost at midnight last night from Vero Beach. I was at the Indian River REC. And just fantastic spreading the word around. I went to USF. I'm trying to reach the college students. Any ideas you can come up with? Ruth handed me a letter this morning, today when I came in that was going to be very helpful. I just know it. And I appreciate all your support so much. So keep what we need to do. We need to get this message out by contacting. If you've never called Rubio, if you've never picked up the phone to him, I sent him a book back in March, along with 11 other senators. Out of my own pocket, I paid to send my book up to Congress, because I was the senators. I was so upset with them because if you recall the executive order back in March that Trump tried to sign, it was against the caravans coming up and over our borders, and those 12 voted against him. Absolutely. And I sent 12 books up to them and I said, don't you dare, you need to read this book. You need to understand these tactics. Because Trump uses Alinsky tactics every single day. And we have to learn how to recognize them so we can start using them and especially start supporting him when he does. Folks, anything you can do to help, I loved being here. Thank you so much for having me.
You can purchase your own copy of Rules for Deplorables, a primer for fighting radical socialism, by visiting Cathi Chamberlain's website at rulesfordeplorablesbook.com or go to amazon.com. It's the best way to prepare for what will be a hard-fought victory in 2020. Vote 2020, Trump or socialism.